Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today I'm going to be doing a first look video for the game The Barracks Emperors. This is a game from GMT and it is designed by Brad Johnson and Wray Ferrell, and it is a card game set during the time of crisis, which if you are familiar with other GMT offerings, there is a game called The Time of Crisis, or maybe it's just Time of Crisis, but it's designed by the same two gentlemen here. And so the subject matter is similar, but this is a completely different kind of game. As you can see here, it is a card game. And if we look at the back, you can see what exactly it means by time of crisis here. So the Barracks Emperors is a strategy card game set against the backdrop of the Roman crisis of the 3rd century, during which at least 45 different men made a claim to the throne of the Roman Empire. So you can see the 3rd century, okay, the year 201 to 300, if you want to be really technical about it. 45 different men, that's an average of a little bit better than 2 years per reign. So obviously it was a time of crisis, but it was also a time of chaos. So in this game, 1 to 4 players represent prominent political factions. So you're not playing as an emperor or anything like that, some kind of family thing. You're playing as a political faction. So the political factions attempting to gain control over the men who would be emperors of Rome. Players deploy the influence available to them, represented by the cards in their hands, to claim imperial reigns. But they must be very careful, for politics is a complex game, and sometimes attempting to exert your influence necessitates aiding someone else in their own plots. Once we get in and look at the mechanics, I'll kind of explain what that kind of means. So you play your cards cleverly to capture emperors and score the most points to win. So as mentioned before, this is a card game. As you can see here, we've got a rule book, a game board, 45 emperor cards, 42 influence cards, 18 barbarian cards, 4 player aid cards, 7 cards for the solo variant. This is a game that you can play solitaire, and six counters. So not much in the terms of counters, and there are no hexes. So this is hexed and countered, but I do branch out a little bit. As you can see, they're squares for the cards. Cards themselves are actually square, which is a little different. These aren't like poker style cards like you would see in many, or even maybe probably most games. These are square cards, so that's a little different. And they go here on this kind of grid, and then around the edges you have barbarian spots. And I'll get into all of that once we get inside the box. But as you can see, it's for 1 to 4 players, 1 to 2 hour playtime. Complexities of 3. This is a fairly low complexity game. Should be easy to pick up, easy to understand, easy to play. And the solitaire suitability is 9. That's obviously because there is a devoted solitaire mode. One thing I will say about GMT is, unlike some companies, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here, but GMT makes a concerted effort, at least of late, to, if possible, I feel like they try to make it possible for their games to be solitaire, to be soloed. So, I bought 3 games in June from them that came out of P500. This one, Border Reavers, and Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, as you undoubtedly know, is a solitaire game. And the reason I haven't done that one I haven't done a first look yet, or I haven't done any gameplay with that, is that's getting extensive coverage. And some of the other games that came out in June aren't getting the same amount of coverage, because Mr. President, by all accounts, is an excellent game. It is a devoted solitaire game, and all the big boy channels like Ardwolf and the Player's Aid, they're all doing videos on it. So I feel like I probably don't need to. I do have it, and I will definitely play it, and I may do some gameplay videos, etc., etc. But like I said, Ardwolf, I know, is doing a big series on this, and he's obviously does tremendous stuff, so I don't really feel like I need to get in on that. So I was going to focus on the other 2 I got, which is this one and Border Reavers. Both those games are multiplayer games. 4 players in this case, up to 6 in Border Reavers, but they both have dedicated solitaire modes as well. So They also have their CDG system and everything. So GMT, big kudos to GMT for kind of taking care of the people who play games solitaire because they either lack an opponent or they just prefer solitaire or whatever it may be. I know not every game can be made into a solo game, but they put forth a lot of effort in trying to kind of cater to that segment of the market. You have other companies like DVG, for example, whose games are almost all primarily solitaire games by design. Because I've done plenty of DVG games here on the channel, and they obviously are mostly solitaire games, and they're all, in my opinion, they're all good, enjoyable games. So let's get into the shrink wrap here. I haven't taken the shrink wrap off of this yet, and look at what's inside the box. Okay, shrink wrap has been removed, so let's open the box here. All right. So, as you would expect, rules of play. Not very thick. As I mentioned, this is a low complexity game. The rule book itself is 14 pages. We do have an index on the back, and we have extended example of play. Let's not start at the back though. So you have basically, I guess the main rules are probably maybe half of this book or so, because you have, the base game, the 4-player game will be pages basically from 2 through 8, I guess. And then on page 9, you have 2-player rules, 3-player rules, 4-player rules, variations, and then solo rules and the example of play. So again, this is not an overly complex game. It is a card game, trick-taking game, essentially. So if you're familiar with trick-taking games, and I'm sure most of us are, this shouldn't be, the theory at least shouldn't be beyond anybody's comprehension. And so, a lot of pictures as usual. GMT rule books tend to have a lot of color illustrations in them, which is always nice. Here you have, this is actually a good thing because this is the layout of the board where you're going to be playing. And you can see the 4 factions. You have the eagle faction, the pillar faction, the wreath faction, and the sword faction. And I'll talk about the cards and how these factions play in and where you can play your cards. Because you can see legal play for pillar. All of these 4, this is an example obviously, but the pillar faction can play in any of these spots. And basically on the card here, and again, I'll show the card later, but you have to play in a spot that basically is connected to, this is an emperor card, it's connected to the symbol here, which is pillar. So pillar can play here. There is an eagle symbol, there is a wreath symbol, and there are sword symbols. So the sword faction would play here. The eagle faction, this is a barbarian square. You can't play here because there's already a card there. When cards have the same value, they kind of cancel each other out. It's a simple, I shouldn't say simple. I hate saying simple. I do it all the time. It's a straightforward, easy to understand system that in my opinion, works pretty well. Now, we do have, like I said, you have the various factions. This goes through how you resolve the emperors. So resolving the emperors, because it's a trick-taking game, you want to take the emperor cards, right? You build it up. You get points for having emperor cards. You get points for collecting what they call sets as well. And you have this forum area, and some of this I'll probably save for when we get to the board. But you have examples of all the different cards, and as you can see, there are also colors as well. And here are the 2-player rules, 3-player, and I mean, they're, a paragraph for 2-player, 3-player, 4-player. Then you have your variations, which is really short, and then solo rules. And the solo rules take up a couple pages here. The solo game is, different. This is about 4 pages, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, and then get to the extended example of play. But you have an example of solo selection. So, as I mentioned, GMT has done an excellent job with trying to kind of make available inside their games the opportunity for solo players, solitaire players, to actually play their games. and not feel like it's kind of half baked, or they have to do, play multiple sides and all that stuff. So the board is surprisingly large for a card game. So let me open this up, and then I'm probably going to have to reset my shot, because as I mentioned, this is a large board for a card game. So here is, obviously, this is the top, or one edge. It's a 4-player game by design, so you are going to have 4 sides, right? So you have emperors go on these spots that have wreaths. Barbarians are around the edges. And you have a nice little kind of map of the Roman Empire area, Europe, North Africa, the British Isles, etc., etc. And if we slide this up, down at the bottom here, or the top if you wanted to spin it around, this is the forum, and you'll put cards in here, and this will be your draw piles basically. And based on the value of the card you play, you have selections of cards that you can choose from. So if you play a high value card, you only get to pick from this box. If you played something that was 6 or lower, you get to pick from this one and this one, and so on, as all the way down to having basically your pick from all 4. Actually, these are the forum cards. I shouldn't say the draw deck. The draw deck actually goes here. We have a discard area. You have emperors and barbarians that I didn't mention up here, and the populous emperors or pretenders. There's an area for those as well. So, as I mentioned, it is obviously a card game, but there is a lot of historical flavor, and that comes into play with some of the other components. So here's our counter sheet. 6 counters. So in the colors as well. So really not a counter game. So now we have our decks. So here are our emperors. Okay, so if we look at this emperor card here. Okay, so here are our emperor cards, right? So there are 45. You can see they have different colors, right? The nice thing is that this is pretty cool. You've got details about them here. Tells you their reign, their death, assassinated. There's a whole lot of assassinated in here. Most of these guys did not have a particularly long life after becoming emperor. So this one obviously is Maximinus Thrax. Then we have Gordian the First. And it tells you how he became emperor, what his reign was, as I mentioned, death. This one committed suicide upon hearing about the death of his son. Gordian II, proclaimed emperor alongside his father in opposition to Maximinus by act of the Senate. He was killed during the Battle of Carthage, fighting a pro-Maximinus army. So these are kind of like in chronological order, it seems like, here by default. Balbinus, Gordian III. Sabinianus, Philip the Arab, Philip II, Pacantius, Jotapian, etc., right? So you go through, all of these guys will get laid out on the board in spots, and then you take them as a trick, right? So those are the emperor cards. Next we have the kind of the influence cards here. Here we have our influence cards, and they'll all have a point value, and they have different colors. So we have blue, we have this kind of reddish color, like a maroon, I guess, and you have yellow or gold. And all of them will have something written on them, influence peddling, so they have kind of an effect. You may add +1 counter to another Senate influence card already played anywhere on the board. Influence peddling, tribute, Princeps Senatus, Foederati, Frumentarii. So yeah, these are kind of the cards that you will play around the emperors. And then once the emperor is surrounded by other cards, they get resolved. And what can happen is you can resolve, if you're the active player, if it's your turn, you can, and there's more than one emperor who can be resolved, because sometimes you'll place a card and you'll end up resolving or basically surrounding more than one emperor. And then you would get to pick which one you resolve first. And as it mentioned on the back of the board, it's possible for you to play a card that helps somebody else, because you may end up, playing a card that resolves an emperor, or maybe more than one emperor, and you'll get one and somebody else might get the other one, or you'll set someone else up for them to be able to resolve the emperor in their favor. So there is a lot of strategy that can be involved in this. It's not luck of the card. You have to be intelligent about where you play your cards and how you play your cards, and be cognizant of the fact that you might be helping an opponent when you're playing something that benefits yourself. You may also benefit somebody else. And these are the barbarian cards. So you can see they've got kind of this brownish color. They are separate from the other ones, and they go around the edges of the board, which kind of emulates to my eyes, or my thinking anyway, the fact that the barbarians surrounded the borders of the empire. So they'll be around the edges of the board. Now you do have these scoring cards, one for each of the 4 factions. So we have Wreath, Swords, Pillar, and Eagle here. Fortified Roma. So you have the ability here, it says instead of placing a barbarian in Roma, flip this card over and discard the barbarian. So basically you can have basic Roma, the city's open, and if it's in this state and a barbarian gets into the city, then the game is over. But if it's on this way, it's fortified and the barbarians don't get into the city. So the barbarians definitely have a role to play, and as I mentioned, this is a card game. It is primarily a card game, but the historical flavor is very high. Obviously, Brad Johnson and Wray Ferrell are pretty solidly knowledgeable, I suppose, I guess is a good term for it, about this particular era of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is, to me, endlessly fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to actually playing this. I will probably do a solitaire playthrough for the channel, just so you guys can see how the game plays. So that is actually going to do it for this particular video, and we'll do something else down the road, obviously. But I do appreciate you guys taking time to watch. As always, I appreciate it. Please feel free to comment. Let me know what you think. If you've played the game and want to talk about, what you think of the game, that would be awesome as well. Interaction is always a good thing, in my opinion. So that will do it, as I said. Until next time, my name is Joe. This has been Hexed Encountered. And until that next time, happy gaming.